My name is Elise Morrow, and I am 34 years old. I know my exact age because my mother reminded me of it 6 hours ago at her 60th birthday dinner in front of 43 guests while holding a glass of champagne that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. 34 and still single, she said, her voice carrying across the rented ballroom like a bell designed to summon shame. I suppose some daughters are meant to be useful in other ways. The room laughed. Not all of them. Some had the decency to look at their plates, but enough. Enough that I could feel the sound settle into my bones like sediment. Another layer added to the geology of my humiliation. I smiled. I always smile. The chandeliers above us cast everything in honey-colored light, the kind of glow that makes even mediocre things look expensive. The tablecloths were cream silk. The centerpieces were white roses and eucalyptus, arranged by a florist whose name my mother dropped 17 times during the planning process. The dinner was filet mignon with truffle butter, and I could smell it mixing with my mother's perfume, Chanel No. 5, which she's worn since I was a child, which I can no longer smell without my stomach tightening into a fist. I was cutting into my steak when my phone buzzed in my clutch. I ignored it. I've learned to ignore things. But it buzzed again and again, 3 times in a rapid succession, the kind of urgent pulse that means something is wrong or something is about to be. I excused myself to the restroom, walking past my sister Margot, who was accepting compliments on her dress. A Valentino that I happened to know cost $4,000 because I'd seen the charge appear on a credit card statement 6 weeks ago. A credit card that, until that moment, I'd believed was closed. In the bathroom, I leaned against the marble counter and opened my phone. 3 alerts from my bank. 3 charges I did not make. $2,400 at a luxury resort in the Maldives. $1,875 at a first-class airline lounge. $890 at a designer boutique I'd never heard of. The total glowed on my screen like a small fire. 5 atoms under 65 in the span of 2 hours. I stared at it. My hands weren't shaking yet. That would come later. But something inside me had gone very still. The kind of stillness that comes before understanding. Before the mind allows itself to connect dots it has been avoiding for years. I put my phone away. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror, brown hair pulled back, minimal makeup, the same navy dress I'd worn to 3 other family events because I couldn't afford anything new. And I went back to the table. My mother was telling a story about her upcoming trip. A healing retreat, she called it, to recover from the stress of her recent health scare. The doctors say I need rest, she said, pressing a hand to her chest with practiced fragility. After everything I've been through, I deserve a little peace. I watched her. I watched the way her fingers curled around her champagne glass, the way her eyes swept the room to ensure everyone was listening, the way she leaned into my stepfather Richard's shoulder with the performance of a woman who has never had to worry about money in her life. 3 months ago, she told me she needed $50,000 for surgery. I gave it to her. I gave her everything I had. I need to go back. I need to explain how I became the kind of person who hands over $50,000 without asking for a receipt, without demanding to see a hospital bill, without doing any of the things that rational people do when someone asks them for money. The answer is simpler and more complicated than you might think. I was raised to be invisible. Not in the dramatic sense. I wasn't locked in a basement or denied food. My invisibility was softer, more insidious. I was the second daughter, born 3 years after Margot, and from the beginning, the roles were clear. Margot was the beauty. Margot was the talent. Margot was the one my mother dressed up and showed off. The one who got piano lessons and ballet classes and a car for her 16th birthday. I was the one who got good grades. I was the one who never caused trouble. I was the one who learned, very early, that the only way to earn space in my family was to be useful. So I became useful. When I was 12, I started doing the household filing because my mother said it gave her migraines. When I was 15, I got a part-time job at a grocery store and used the money to buy my own school supplies so I wouldn't have to ask. When I was 18, I turned down a scholarship to a university 3 states away because my mother cried and said she couldn't bear to lose me, that she needed me close, that family had to stick together. I went to community college instead. I got a degree in accounting. I got a job at a mid-sized firm where I was competent and quiet and never asked for raises. Because I'd been trained to believe that asking for things was the same as being greedy. And somewhere along the way, without ever making a conscious decision, I became the family's financial infrastructure. It started small. A phone bill here, a utility payment there. My mother would call, her voice trembling with just the right amount of distress, and explain that things were tight this month, that Richard's business was struggling, that Margot had unexpected expenses. Could I help? Just this once? It was never just once. The requests grew. The excuses multiplied. I paid for Margot's wedding, not officially, of course, but I covered the overages that somehow totaled more than the original budget. I paid for my mother's emergency dental work, her necessary home repairs, her critical car maintenance. I co-signed a loan for Richard's business expansion, a decision that haunted my credit score for years. I never said no. I never asked questions. I told myself this was what family did. That love meant sacrifice. That my discomfort was a small price to pay for belonging. But here's the thing about being the invisible support beam. No one notices you until you crack. And I was cracking long before that birthday dinner. I just didn't know it yet. The surgery request came in April. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice thick with tears. She'd been to the doctor. They'd found something. She didn't want to say what over the phone. It was too frightening, too personal, but she needed a procedure. Specialized. Expensive. Her insurance wouldn't cover it. How much? I asked, already opening my laptop, already calculating what I could move, what I could liquidate, what I could sacrifice. 50,000, she whispered. I know it's a lot. I know I have no right to ask. But Elise, I'm scared. I'm so scared. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for documentation. I didn't suggest she get a second opinion or look into payment plans or apply for medical assistance programs. I transferred the money the next day. $50,000. My entire savings. Every dollar I'd accumulated over 15 years of careful living, of skipped vacations and secondhand furniture and saying no to every small pleasure that might have made my life a little brighter. Gone. In a single transaction. Because my mother said she was sick. After the transfer, I felt empty. Not relieved, not virtuous. Just hollow, like I'd scooped out some essential part of myself and handed it over without even looking at what I was losing. But I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that this was what mattered, that money was just money, that I could rebuild. I told myself a lot of things. The weeks after the transfer were strange. My mother's updates were vague. The surgery was scheduled, then rescheduled, then moved to a different facility. She couldn't have visitors during recovery. She needed complete rest. She'd call when she was ready. I accepted all of it. I was so well trained in acceptance that it didn't occur to me to push, to question, to show up unannounced at her door and demand to see the bandages. But small things started to nag at me. Comments that didn't quite fit. Photos that appeared on Margot's social media. My mother at a restaurant. My mother at a spa. My mother looking remarkably healthy for someone who'd just undergone major surgery. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that recovery looked different for everyone, that she was entitled to enjoy herself, that I was being petty and suspicious and all the things I'd been taught never to be. Then came the credit card alerts. I'd frozen that card months ago. I was certain of it. After the last round of mysterious charges that my mother swore were identity theft, that she promised to investigate, that somehow never got resolved, I'd called the bank and requested a freeze. But there it was. Active. Being used. I called the bank that night, sitting in my small apartment with the lights off. My voice steady, even as my hands trembled. "I need to understand how this card was reactivated," I said. The representative was apologetic. There had been a request, a phone call, someone claiming to be me, with my social security number, with my mother's maiden name, with all the security answers that only a family member would know. "When?" I asked. "6 weeks ago, ma'am." 6 weeks. 2 weeks after I transferred the $50,000. I thanked the representative. I hung up. I sat in the dark for a very long time. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I'd never done that before, not once in 11 years. I'd gone to the office with fevers, with migraines, with a broken toe I'd wrapped myself because I couldn't afford to miss a day. But that morning, I couldn't make myself stand up. I couldn't make myself pretend that everything was fine. Instead, I started looking. I began with my credit report. I'd checked it occasionally over the years, but always quickly, always with the assumption that everything was in order. This time, I read every line. What I found made me nauseous. There were accounts I didn't recognize, store cards I'd never applied for, a second credit card with a limit I'd never requested, a personal loan taken out 18 months ago, payments delinquent, my name and address listed as the primary borrower. I printed everything. I spread it across my kitchen table. I stared at it until the numbers blurred and reformed into something that looked like a map of my own exploitation. Then I started making calls. The store cards had been opened in person, with a driver's license that matched my information, but not my face. The credit card had been requested online, using an email address I didn't recognize. The personal loan had been signed with a signature that looked almost like mine, close enough to pass a cursory check, different enough that I knew I hadn't written it. Each call took hours. Each representative asked the same questions, expressed the same sympathy, offered the same forms. By the end of the day, my voice was hoarse and my kitchen table was covered in papers, and my understanding of my own life had shifted so fundamentally that I wasn't sure I recognized myself anymore. I wasn't just the family's financial support. I was their identity, their credit score, their safety net and their piggy bank and their get-out-of-jail-free card, all wrapped up in a social security number they'd memorized without my knowledge. I'd been paying for my own invisibility, and I'd never even known. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to my mother's house. Not to confront her, I wasn't ready for that, wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. But to see. To look at the life my money had been building while I ate rice and beans and told myself that sacrifice was noble. The house was lit up like a showroom. Through the windows, I could see the new furniture, the new curtains, the massive television mounted above the fireplace. In the driveway sat 2 cars. My mother's Mercedes, which she'd told me was a necessary expense for her image, and a BMW I didn't recognize. I parked across the street and watched. After an hour, the front door opened. My mother emerged, dressed in silk pajamas and a cashmere robe, carrying a glass of wine. She stood on the porch, looking up at the stars, and I watched her face in the porch light. She didn't look sick. She didn't look like a woman recovering from surgery. She looked relaxed, content, like someone who had never worried about money in her life, because she hadn't. Because I had worried for her. I drove home. I didn't cry. I was past crying, past the kind of grief that comes with tears. What I felt was colder, harder, a recognition that something fundamental had broken, and that I was the one who would have to decide what to build from the pieces. The next week was a blur of documentation. I requested 5 years of bank statements. I downloaded every transaction, every transfer, every automatic payment that had been quietly draining my accounts. I created a spreadsheet, because that's what accountants do. We create spreadsheets, we turn chaos into columns and rows, and I started adding up the numbers. The process was mechanical, clinical. I approached it the same way I approached client audits, with detachment and precision, because if I let myself feel what I was finding, I would shatter. The spreadsheet grew. The numbers climbed. And slowly, methodically, the full picture emerged. I'd been subsidizing my family's lifestyle for over a decade. Not just the emergency requests, not just the temporary help, but a constant, invisible flow of money that had become so normalized that no one even acknowledged it anymore. The monthly gifts to my mother that had somehow become expected. The bills I paid just this once that I was still paying years later. The loans I co-signed that had defaulted, damaging my credit while the actual borrowers faced no consequences. The credit cards opened in my name, maxed out on purchases I'd never made, payments missed until collection agencies started calling. And underneath all of it, the $50,000. My surgery money, my mother's lie. I found the proof on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd been searching through Margot's social media, something I rarely did, because seeing her life usually made me feel small. When I found a photo from 3 weeks ago, my mother and Margot standing in front of a resort I recognized from the bank alerts. Crystal blue water, white sand, matching sarongs and cocktails with little umbrellas. The caption read, "Mother-daughter healing retreat. So grateful for this time together. Blessed, Bar's family first." The date on the photo was 2 days after my mother told me she was in recovery. 2 days after she said she couldn't have visitors. 2 days after I sat alone in my apartment, eating soup from a can, worrying about whether she was in pain. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I closed my laptop, and I made a decision. I didn't confront them, not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to know the full scope of the damage, the full extent of the theft, the full depth of the betrayal. I needed receipts, so I gathered them. I spent 2 weeks building a case. I contacted every creditor, every bank, every institution that had my name attached to an account I didn't recognize. I filed disputes, I requested investigations, I documented everything, every phone call, every email, every piece of evidence that proved I was not the person who had opened these accounts, made these purchases, signed these documents. The process was exhausting. There were days when I came home from work and sat in my car for an hour, unable to summon the energy to walk up the stairs to my apartment. There were nights when I lay awake until dawn, running numbers in my head, calculating losses that felt less like money and more like pieces of my own life that had been stolen and sold. But I kept going. Because somewhere in the wreckage, I'd found something unexpected: anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. I'd never been capable of that. But a cold, steady flame that burned in my chest and gave me the strength to keep digging, keep documenting, keep building the case that would eventually set me free. I met with a financial advisor, a woman named Patricia Chen, recommended by a colleague, who looked at my spreadsheets with the kind of professional horror that told me I wasn't overreacting. "This is extensive," she said, flipping through the pages, "and systematic. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "My family," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a language I was still learning. "My mother, my sister, maybe my stepfather." Patricia didn't flinch. I got the sense she'd seen this before, that family financial abuse was more common than anyone wanted to admit. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I'd been thinking about that question for days. The answer had crystallized slowly, like ice forming on a window until it was clear and hard and impossible to ignore. "I want to stop," I said. "I want to cut them off. I want to take back everything they've stolen and make sure they can never do this again." Patricia nodded. "Then we have work to do." The plan took shape over the following weeks. First, the immediate protections. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I changed every password, every security question, every piece of identifying information that my family might have known. I closed the compromised accounts and opened new ones at a different bank, one my mother had never heard of, with alerts set to notify me of any activity. Then, the harder work. I removed myself from every joint account, every co-signed loan, every financial entanglement that tied me to my family. Some of this was simple: a phone call, a form, a signature. Some of it was complicated, requiring lawyers and disputes and negotiations that dragged on for weeks. I documented everything, every conversation, every transaction, every piece of evidence that proved what had been done to me. I built a folder on my computer. I called it The Truth, and I filled it with receipts and statements and screenshots until it was so comprehensive that no one could deny what it contained. And I waited. I waited for the right moment, the moment when the truth would have the most impact, when the consequences would be impossible to avoid, when my family would finally understand that the invisible daughter had been watching all along. That moment came on a Thursday afternoon in July. I was at work when my phone buzzed. A text from Margot, which was unusual. We rarely communicated directly. Most family information, filtered through my mother, carefully curated to maintain whatever narrative she was constructing. Mom and I are at the airport, off to Paris for a girls' trip. Wish you could come. Attached was a photo, my mother and Margot standing in what was clearly a first-class lounge. Champagne glasses in hand, designer luggage at their feet, smiles so bright they could have been in a commercial. I looked at that photo, and something inside me went very quiet. Paris, first class, a girls' trip that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. And I was sitting at my desk, eating a sandwich I'd packed from home, wearing a blouse I'd bought at a thrift store, still recovering from the financial devastation of giving my mother $50,000 for a surgery that never happened. I excused myself from the office. I went to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, breathing slowly, feeling the cold anger in my chest crystallize into something sharper. Then I made a phone call. I need to report fraud, I said when the bank representative answered. Unauthorized use of my identity, theft. The representative was professional, sympathetic, efficient. She asked questions. I answered them. I provided account numbers, transaction dates, evidence of the theft. I explained that the perpetrators were currently traveling internationally, using funds obtained through identity fraud. We'll flag the accounts immediately, she said. Any cards associated with these accounts will be frozen within the hour. Thank you, I said. I hung up. I sat in my car for another few minutes, feeling the weight of what I'd just done settle into my bones. Then I drove home, and I waited for the fallout. The first call came that evening. My mother's voice was shrill, panicked, nothing like the composed woman who had humiliated me at her birthday dinner. Elise, something's wrong with my cards. None of them are working. We're stuck at the hotel, and they won't let us check out, and I don't understand what's happening. I know, I said. There was a pause. A long, terrible pause. What do you mean, you know? I reported the fraud, I said. My voice was steady. I'd practiced this conversation in my head 100 times, and now that it was happening, I felt almost calm. The unauthorized use of my identity, the accounts opened in my name, the credit cards, the loans, all of it. Elise, what are you talking about? The surgery, I said. The $50,000 I gave you for a surgery that never happened. The vacation you took instead. The resort in the Maldives. The first-class flights. The designer clothes. All paid for with money you stole from me. Silence. Then, incredibly, a laugh. Stole? Elise, don't be dramatic. You're family. Family helps each other. That's what we do. No, I said. That's what I did, for years. And you took advantage of it. You took my money, my credit, my identity. You built your entire lifestyle on my back, and you never once said thank you. You never once acknowledged what I was sacrificing. You just kept taking and taking and taking until there was nothing left. This is ridiculous. I'm your mother. Everything I've ever done has been for this family. Everything you've ever done has been for yourself, I said. And Margot, I was just the one who paid for it. I could hear Margot in the background, her voice rising in panic. Something about the hotel manager, about their luggage being held, about needing to call someone. Elise, you need to fix this, my mother said. Her voice had shifted, become harder, more demanding. Call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. We're stranded here. We have nothing. I know, I said. That's the point. Elise, I'm done heart, I said. I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being your credit score. I'm done being the invisible daughter who pays for everything and gets nothing in return. You wanted a vacation? You got one, but you're going to have to figure out how to pay for it yourself. I hung up. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But underneath the fear, underneath the guilt that my conditioning tried to summon, there was something else. Relief. The calls kept coming. My mother, Margot, Richard, numbers I didn't recognize. Probably friends or relatives recruited to pressure me into backing down. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat in my apartment and watched the notifications pile up. Voicemails that grew increasingly desperate, increasingly angry, increasingly threatening. Texts that ranged from pleading to accusatory to outright cruel. You're destroying this family. How could you do this to your own mother? You've always been jealous of Margot. This is just your way of getting revenge. We'll never forgive you for this. I read them all. I felt the weight of each one. The years of conditioning that told me I was wrong, that I was selfish, that I was the villain in this story. But I also had my spreadsheet. I had my receipts. I had the cold, hard evidence of everything they'd taken from me, laid out in columns and rows that couldn't be argued with or explained away. The total, when I finally calculated it, was staggering. $367,842. That was how much my family had cost me over the past 12 years. Direct payments, indirect subsidies, fraudulent charges, defaulted loans, damaged credit. Nearly $400,000 extracted from my life, one emergency at a time, while I ate cheap food and wore secondhand clothes and told myself that sacrifice was love. I looked at that number for a long time. Then I added it to my folder, and I started planning the next phase. The fallout was swift and brutal. Without access to my credit, my identity, my willingness to bail them out, my family's carefully constructed lifestyle began to collapse. The Paris trip ended in disaster. They managed to get home. I never learned exactly how, and I didn't ask, but the experience had clearly shaken them. The first-class flights became economy. The luxury hotel became a budget motel near the airport. The designer luggage, I later heard, had to be left behind because they couldn't pay the storage fees. But that was just the beginning. The credit cards I'd reported as fraudulent were permanently closed. The accounts opened in my name were flagged and frozen. The loans that had been taken out using my identity were now under investigation, and the institutions wanted answers. Answers that my mother and Margot couldn't provide without admitting to crimes. I watched from a distance as the dominoes fell. The Mercedes was repossessed. Then the BMW. My mother's house, the showroom I'd driven past that night, with its new furniture and massive television, went into foreclosure when the mortgage payments stopped. Richard's business, which had been propped up by loans co-signed in my name, collapsed under the weight of its own debt. I should have felt guilty. Part of me did. The part that had been trained since childhood to put family first, to sacrifice myself for their comfort, to believe that my own needs were less important than theirs. But a larger part of me felt something else. Something I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Freedom. The final confrontation came 3 months later. I was at a coffee shop near my office, working on my laptop, when I looked up and saw my mother standing in the doorway. She looked different, older. The careful grooming that had always been her armor was gone. Her hair was unstyled, her makeup minimal, her clothes ordinary. She looked, for the first time in my memory, like a woman who had run out of options. She walked to my table and sat down without asking. "We need to talk," she said. I closed my laptop. "Okay. What you did..." She stopped, took a breath, tried again. "What you did was cruel, vindictive. You destroyed our lives." "No," I said. "I stopped funding them. There's a difference. We're your family, Elise. Family is supposed to what?" I asked. "Love each other? Support each other? Because from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what I did. For 12 years. And what did I get in return? Humiliation, exploitation, theft. We never stole from you. Everything we did together, as a family. You opened credit cards in my name without my knowledge. You took out loans using my identity. You used my social security number to fund vacations and shopping sprees while I was eating rice and beans to make ends meet. That's not family, that's fraud. My mother's face hardened. You always were ungrateful. After everything I sacrificed to raise you. What did you sacrifice? I asked. The question was genuine. I wanted to know. What did you ever give up for me? Because I can tell you exactly what I gave up for you. I gave up my savings, my credit, my 20s, my chance at a normal life. I gave up everything, and you never once said thank you. You never once acknowledged that I was the reason you could live the way you lived. That's not... I have receipts, I said. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder, turned the screen toward her. $367,842. That's how much I've paid for this family over the past 12 years. Direct payments, indirect subsidies, fraudulent charges, defaulted loans. Do you want to see the breakdown? I have spreadsheets. My mother stared at the screen. Her face went pale. That can't be right. It's right. I'm an accountant. Numbers are what I do. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. We didn't mean for it to go this far. It just happened. One thing led to another. And before you knew it, you were living off my labor while treating me. Like I didn't exist. Before you knew it, you were taking first-class vacations with money I gave you for surgery. Before you knew it, you'd stolen my entire future and convinced yourself it was your right. Elise, I'm done, I said. I'm done being your bank. I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being the invisible daughter who pays for everything and gets nothing in return. If you want to rebuild your life, you're going to have to do it yourself. Without my money, without my credit, without me. I stood up. I gathered my things. My mother reached for my arm and I stepped back. Please, she said. We're family. I looked at her. Really looked. Maybe for the first time. I saw the woman who had raised me to be invisible. The woman who had taught me that my worth was measured in what I could provide. The woman who had taken everything I had and called it love. Family, I said, is not a free pass to be cruel. And love without respect is just control in a nicer outfit. I walked out of the coffee shop. I didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. My life now is quieter, smaller, but it's mine. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, a place my family has never seen and will never find. It's modest. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a window that looks out over a courtyard where someone planted roses. But it's the first space I've ever had that belongs only to me. I'm rebuilding my finances slowly. The fraud investigations are ongoing, and some of the damage to my credit will take years to repair. But I'm making progress. I have a budget now, one that accounts for my own needs, my own wants, my own future. I'm saving again, not for emergencies that aren't mine, but for things I actually want. A vacation, a better apartment, maybe someday a house of my own. I don't speak to my family anymore. My mother has tried to reach out, letters mostly, since I blocked her number. They range from apologetic to accusatory, depending on her mood. Margot sends occasional texts from new numbers, usually asking for money, apparently unable to comprehend that the well has run dry. Richard, as far as I know, has disappeared entirely, probably running from creditors. I don't respond to any of it. I've learned that engagement is just another form of entanglement, and I've spent too many years tangled in their needs to risk it again. Sometimes, late at night, I feel guilty. The conditioning runs deep, and there are moments when I wonder if I was too harsh, too unforgiving, too willing to burn bridges that might have been worth saving. But then I remember the birthday dinner, the champagne, the laughter, the way my mother looked at me like I was nothing, like I was less than nothing, like my only value was in what I could provide. And I remember the spreadsheet, the receipts, the $367,000 that I gave to people who never once saw me as anything more than a resource to be exploited. I don't feel guilty anymore. There's a moment I keep coming back to. It was the night after I reported the fraud, after the first wave of panicked calls, after I'd turned off my phone and sat alone in my apartment, waiting for the guilt to overwhelm me. It didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. I felt light, not happy exactly. Happiness would take time, would require healing I hadn't yet begun, but light, unburdened, like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten it was there, and suddenly, impossibly, it was gone. I sat by my window that night and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about all the years I'd spent being invisible, being useful, being the foundation that no one noticed until it cracked. I thought about the money I'd given and the love I'd hoped to receive, and the endless, exhausting cycle of sacrifice and disappointment. And I thought about what it might mean to live differently, to be visible, to take up space, to believe that my own needs mattered, that my own life was worth investing in, that I deserved more than the scraps left over after everyone else had taken their fill. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the beginning of something I didn't yet have words for. I'm still learning, still figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by what I can provide to others, still unlearning the lessons that taught me to make myself small, to ask for nothing, to accept crumbs and call them love. But I'm learning, and that's enough. If you're reading this and any of it sounds familiar, if you recognize the exhaustion, the invisibility, the endless giving that never seems to be enough, I want you to know something. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Family is important, love is important, but neither of those things should require you to sacrifice your own well-being, your own future, your own sense of self. If the people who claim to love you are only interested in what you can provide, that's not love. That's extraction. That's exploitation. That's a transaction dressed up in the language of affection. You deserve better. You deserve people who see you, who value you, who love you for who you are rather than what you can give them. And if the people in your life can't offer that, if they can only take and take and take, then you have every right to walk away. It won't be easy. The guilt will come, and the doubt, and the voices that tell you you're being selfish, ungrateful, cruel. Those voices are lying. They're the echoes of a system that benefited from your silence, your compliance, your willingness to put yourself last. You don't have to listen to them anymore. My name is Elise Morrow. I am 35 years old. I know my exact age because I celebrated my birthday last month, alone, in my small apartment with the window that looks out over the roses. I made